I was there when the lights changed everything. But before I tell you what happened that cold night in Times Square, you need to understand it was no longer the Times Square we knew from old movies. The giant billboards still dominated the sky, but now they only displayed messages approved by the DCI Department of Inclusive Celebrations. Happy Holidays flashed the largest panel. Next to it, another massive billboard read, Festival of Lights, all beliefs, no prejudice. The former site of the Christmas tree now housed a collective awakening art installation, basically a spiral of LEDs that changed color according to the city's social inclusion index. The festive discrimination protection force officers patrolled every corner, their purple uniforms equipped with scanners that detected any traditional religious symbols. I saw them arrest an elderly man. He must have been about 80 years old, because his grandson blurted out, "Grandpa, it's almost Christmas," out loud. "Festive hate speech," shouted the officer as he handcuffed the 7-year-old boy. In stores, mannequins wearing gender-neutral seasonal sharing outfits displayed badges with neutral pronouns. The old Macy's, now called the Conscious Commerce Space, featured a giant banner, "Gift responsibly. Every purchase converts to carbon credits." The incident began at 11:47 p.m., when Sarah Chen, an influencer with 50 million followers on Inclusivity Tech, was live streaming the urban solstice celebrations. Her cutting-edge smartphone, equipped with microaggression protection, picked up something that shouldn't have been there, a reflection in the mirrored glass of the former ABC building. Now the Ministry of Non-Oppressive Communications headquarters, a star. Not a government-approved hologram or authorized projection, but a real star, too bright to be natural or legal. The live chat exploded with trigger warnings and requests for content advisories. But before Sarah could activate her anti-trauma digital shield, something even more intriguing happened. It all started in 2031, when the Festive Neutrality Act was passed. But the seeds had been sown years earlier, around 2018, in a society increasingly obsessed with a distorted version of inclusion. First, it was the universities. The movement began with seemingly reasonable demands for respect for religious diversity. Activist students demanded that Christian symbols be removed from campuses because they oppressed other beliefs. University administrations, fearing accusations of intolerance, quickly complied. By 2028, the Cultural Neutrality Movement, CNM, gained traction on social media. Influencers with millions of followers began aggressive cancellation, campaigns against any company daring to use terms like Christmas or Easter in their advertisements. Corporations, always sensitive to public opinion, quickly changed their marketing strategies. The next step was primary education. The Department of Education, under pressure from activist groups, banned Christmas plays in public schools. Winter celebrations became mandatory with strict cultural representation quotas. Teachers were fired for mentioning the birth of Christ, even in historical contexts. Mainstream media amplified the movement. Educational documentaries explained how Christian traditions were actually cultural appropriations of pagan rituals. Talk shows ridiculed people who still celebrated traditional Christmas. Celebrities competed to see who could be the most conscious in their neutral celebrations. In 2030, Congress, dominated by a new generation of ultra-progressive politicians, began debating the Festive Neutrality Act. The law was sold to the public as a measure of social harmony and multicultural respect. Few realized it was the beginning of systematic persecution. The act not only banned religious expressions in public spaces, it created a state surveillance apparatus. The newly formed Department of Inclusive Celebrations, DCI, was granted extraordinary powers. Undercover agents monitored family gatherings. algorithms scanned social media for non-inclusive festive discourse. Punishments were severe and escalated quickly. First offense, $10,000 fine. Second, job loss and inclusion in a national cancellation list. Third, festive re-education in special centers. No one who entered these centers ever came out the same. By 2032, even decorations in private homes were banned. Government satellites scanned neighborhoods for suspicious lights or shapes resembling religious symbols. Informants were rewarded with social credits, which could be exchanged for privileges like better job placement or access to premium neighborhoods. The most frightening part was how children were being affected. An entire generation grew up without knowing the true story of Christmas. In schools, they learned it was an oppressive myth used to promote religious supremacy. Some parents who tried teaching the truth at home lost custody of their children. It was in this climate of fear and persecution that the voice of the star began to form. At first, we were just a group of people sharing memories on encrypted forums. But we soon realized we needed to do more. The light of truth was fading, and someone needed to reignite it. The voice of the star was born in the depths of the dark web, where it was still possible to share messages of faith without DCI censorship algorithms. There were 12 of us, a number we did not choose by chance. Our leader, whom we only called Maria, lost her position as a university professor when she refused to replace Christmas studies with analysis of oppressive structures of winter holidays. The group was diverse but united by the same cause. Josh, our digital security expert, was canceled after posting a photo wearing a Christmas sweater. Sarah, a systems engineer, lost her startup when she refused to implement filters that automatically censored any religious references on social media. Mike, who handled the electrical systems, had his son taken away after teaching him about Jesus' birth. The DCI was not our only problem. The Committee for Equitable Celebrations, CEC, had infiltrators everywhere. They called themselves inclusion warriors, but were more commonly known in the underground as Christ hunters. They used advanced technology, drones with an eye that detected suspicious gatherings, algorithms that identified problematic behavior patterns, and the scariest, nanobots that could be injected into suspects to monitor their brainwaves for non-inclusive thoughts. In 2036, the government implemented the mandatory festive re-education program. Children were taught that religious symbols were forms of cultural violence. Schools celebrated Universal Light Day, where they learned that all traditions were equally valid except, of course, Christian ones labeled as hegemonically oppressive. Our plan seemed suicidal. The Times Square panels were protected by 5 layers of security, including the infamous Snowflake Protocol, a system that automatically canceled any attempt to display content unvalidated by the Sentiment Protection League. At every step of planning, we encountered resistance. The Digital Equity Department tracked every suspicious bite. Activists from the December for All movement conducted constant patrols. Thought police installed microaggression detectors on every corner. But something strange began to happen. Our codes worked perfectly the first time, even against theoretically impenetrable protocols. Equipment appeared exactly when we needed it. And most inexplicably, all 27 celebratory compliance officers guarding the main panels experienced the same phenomenon dreams of a bright star that temporarily blinded them. Maria insisted it was no coincidence. They tried to replace faith with algorithms, she said, but they forgot there are codes older than computers. When asked what codes those were, she just smiled and pointed to the sky. The plan was ready. But the night before execution, something strange happened. All group members received the same cryptic message on their devices. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1 to 5. The odd part was that none of us had sent the message. Stranger still, it appeared even on devices that were turned off. During preparations, the signs began subtly. First, there were alerts from the Department of Inclusive Celebrations about suspicious anti-inclusive activities in the area. The festive peace agents, dressed in their gender-neutral certified purple uniforms, patrolled the streets with discriminatory energy detectors. Rachel Martinez, our systems expert, discovered something disturbing in the DCI's files, a project called Luminous Purification. The government was developing technology to detect and neutralize any manifestation of traditionalist energy, its scientific definition for faith. The documents mentioned experiments on people who still retained traces of ancient beliefs. 3 of our group members disappeared after a cultural awareness intervention. Mike's last post on Freedom Chat read, "Something is watching us. It's not human. It's not from the government. It's like an absence." Government news increased reports about traditionalist attacks. A reporter from the Diversity Channel wearing a rainbow hijab, the new symbol of unity in differences, warned about groups trying to resurrect oppressive symbols. The Committee for Sentiment Protection, CSP, issued an official statement. Any manifestation resembling ancient power structures based on exclusivist mythologies would be considered an act of collective emotional violence. In Times Square, things got stranger. DCI agents were found unconscious, mumbling about too much light. Their body camera recordings showed only static and a high-pitched sound government experts classified as discriminatory frequency. Maria received an anonymous warning. The Department of Historical Reassignment is using the panels for something bigger. It's not just about erasing Christmas, it's about rewriting light. Security cameras began spontaneously burning out. The most disturbing part was the pattern, always 33 cameras at a time. The Inclusive Technology Department classified it as a glitch caused by bias algorithms and replaced the entire system with bias-free cameras. People reported hearing chants coming from the sewers. The Department of Safe Sounds sent acoustic neutralization specialists, but they returned mute, literally. Their medical reports mentioned exposure to unknown frequencies with patterns, reminiscent of prescribed ancestral rituals. A week before the operation, all the Times Square panels simultaneously displayed a message for 3 seconds, "True light approaching." The government blamed conservative hackers, but we hadn't done anything yet. The Department of Equitable Meteorology began reporting concerning luminous anomalies. Stars appeared where they shouldn't. The moon seemed brighter, despite atmospheric filters installed to ensure socially responsible nocturnal lighting. On the eve of the operation, we lost contact with 3 more members. Their last messages were unsettling. The shadow has a shape, it watches, but not with eyes. It's like it absorbs the light. Not the light from the panels, the light inside us. The Collective Mental Health Department issued an alert about outbreaks of traditionalist nostalgia, offering free sessions of festive deprogramming. In treatment centers, patients reported dreams of a star too big and songs in impossible languages. Maria insisted on continuing, even when strange symbols began forming on our monitors. The most frequent resembled a star, but viewed from an impossible angle, as if bending space around it. The tension peaked when the very air seemed to vibrate with ancient energy. Government atmospheric harmony filters failed in succession. And in the heart of Times Square, between the panels still controlled by the DCI, that shadow began moving as if rehearsing for something greater. It was time. The plan had to happen that night. But as we prepared, a grim certainty grew. We were not in control. We never had been. At 11:59 p.m. on December 24th, our fingers hovered over the keyboards. Times Square buzzed with the usual celebration of the end of cycle diversity festival, the politically correct name the DCI had created to replace any reference to Christmas. On the main screen, a drag queen was reading inclusive winter tales to children. Next to it, panels displayed messages like celebrate the collective, respect all paths, and tradition is oppression. The DCI had turned the date into a demonstration of ideological power. Now, Maria whispered into our communicators. We pressed enter simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panels flickered. A drag queen froze mid-performance. The speakers playing non-culturally appropriative winter melodies went silent. The first panel to change was the largest, right in the center. The image of a star, not a government-approved stylized symbol, but a real pulsating living star burst onto the screen. The crowd collectively gasped. That's religious microaggression, someone shouted. I need my safe space. But no one moved. The panels continued changing. Scenes of Christ's birth replaced ads for socially conscious gifts. Angels took the place of slogans about festive deconstruction. DCI agents rushed to their tablets, desperately trying to regain control. Code red. Toxic religious manifestation in progress. That's when the impossible began. Snow, which had been banned for being a symbol of climatic privilege, started to fall. Not regular snow, but flakes that glowed with their own light. Each flake reflected a different scene. Families gathered around Christmas trees, children singing carols, churches celebrating midnight mass. Protection! Protection! Shouted a DCI agent, handing out special anti-oppression goggles. Don't let these images colonize your minds. But the goggles melted upon contact with the luminous snow. The government speakers, programmed to emit inclusive white noise in emergencies, began playing Christmas carols. A woman wearing a social deconstruction coordinator badge fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I'm remembering, she whispered, Christmas with my grandmother. The cookies, the stories, no, shouted the chief of thought police, running with a megaphone. Maintain your mental shields. This is supremacist Christian manipulation. But his voice was drowned out by a sudden and absolute silence. All 27 panels now displayed the same image, a simple manger, emanating a light no technology could replicate. The entire crowd, including professional protesters hired by the government, stood paralyzed. Phones slipped from hands. DCI tablets went dark. For 33 minutes, all of Manhattan was in a collective trance. I saw people spontaneously hugging. A group of festive privilege auditors began singing Silent Night. A child pointed to the sky and said, "Look, Mommy," just like at Grandma's house. The director of the DCI made one last desperate attempt. Attention. You are experiencing an attack of toxic nostalgia. This is emotional terrorism. But his voice was interrupted by a sound no one had heard in years. Church bells. Not a recording or simulation, but real bells. Even though all the churches in the area had been converted into cultural reorientation centers. For 33 minutes, Times Square was transformed. I saw people rediscovering memories they had been forced to forget. DCI agents openly wept, some crossing themselves for the first time in years. That's when I noticed something strange. Our codes weren't just working, they were writing themselves, creating effects we hadn't programmed. It was as if another intelligence, something far beyond our understanding, was in control. The DCI chief seemed to notice too. He stared at his tablet in panic. This is impossible. The system is praying. Not everyone reacted well to the liberation. Some of the DCI's more radical militants began shouting about symbolic violence and institutionalized religious oppression. But their voices were silenced not by force or censorship, but by something far more powerful: memory. For 33 minutes, the true light shone over Times Square, and nothing, not the thought police, not censorship algorithms, not forced inclusion policies could stop it. In every corner, in every gaze, on every screen it read, "Merry Christmas." When the lights went out, something remained. Among the now dark panels, a shadow moved. It wasn't an ordinary shadow, it seemed like a tear in reality itself, sucking in all light around it. And it had a human shape. In the following days, the media went into a frenzy. The New Progressive Times published an article claiming the light show was an act of religious terrorism against safe spaces. Activists from the Winter for All movement organized protests demanding that the Times Square panels could only display neutral and inclusive messages. The department launched an investigation into cultural appropriation of winter festivities. Experts in decolonizing celebrations were called to explain how the mention of Christ's birth was a form of symbolic violence against other narratives. But something strange began happening to the loudest protesters. The shadow, the very same one seen among the panels, started appearing in their live streams and photos. At first subtly, a dark blur here, a distortion there, then more clearly. Sarah Chen, the influencer who had denounced our attack on festive diversity, was the first to change. During a podcast where she criticized Kristen Armadavi, the broadcast was interrupted by static. When it resumed, Sarah was speaking about how she had seen the truth in the shadows. Her channel was canceled the following day. One by one, the most radical voices against our demonstration fell silent. Not through censorship or persecution, they simply changed. All of them reported encounters with the shadow. All of them spoke about seeing beyond the narrative. The DCI tried to control the damage. They launched a massive campaign on Christmas misinformation and religious radicalization. They created re-education programs, but every new attempt to erase the meaning of Christmas seemed to strengthen that presence. We discovered something even more disturbing. None of us in the group had actually programmed the images that appeared. The codes we used had been written in a language that doesn't exist in any known computer. It was as if something or someone had used our actions as a gateway. The DCI's security cameras captured shocking footage, the shadow visiting each radical protester during their sleep. With every visit, it left something behind, a kind of dark mark that spread like ink in the consciousness of its hosts. Today, a year later, the shadow is still there, moving among the panels of Times Square. But it is no longer alone. Every person who attempts to campaign against the true meaning of Christmas receives its visit. Every effort to censor the original story draws its attention. The irony is striking. The system that tried to erase Christ ended up creating its own supernatural antagonist. The shadow seems to feed especially on excessive political correctness and false moralism. The more someone tries to forcibly impose their inclusive vision, the more the darkness marks them. Christmas has returned to Times Square, yes, but it brought with it a dark guardian that uses the system's own weapons against it. With every attempt at censorship, every cancellation hashtag, every accusation of hate speech against faith, the shadow grows. And now, on the darkest nights, we can see it wasn't a victory we achieved. It was an awakening. Something very old and very patient had been waiting for the moment they tried to completely extinguish the light, to show the true meaning of darkness.